Hi, I'm B from Negative Mechanics, and welcome back to my Cel-Shaded Jazz project. In today's part 3, we make the mid-transformation model, Blaster, Blaster's robot mode, the diorama, and Teletran. Not to mention, we also fiddle around with textures and compositing. Buckle up, it's gonna be a long one. So if for some reason you decided to start with part 3 of this series, then let me get you up to speed. In episode 1, we planned out what our animation's going to be using FlipperClip to make a 2D animatic. We also then 3D modeled his car mode in Blender. I used grease pencil and material nodes to give him a cool 80s cel-shaded look. Then in episode 2, I made the robot mode, attaching the car parts to the robot so it looks like a real transformer. So we got quite a fair bit done, or do we? The problem is that we need a background, we need props, we're nowhere near done. We're gonna start off with making a mid-transformation model. What do I mean by that? Well, I have the car model, I have the robot model, and while the robot model can kinda look like he turns to a car, it ain't perfect, and it's gonna look weird in the animation. So we need to make a third one that's an in-between one that we can swap out. So what I did is I duplicated the robot mode and got to work. I cut it and added new parts as necessary. For instance, for that glass, I made little sort of sliders so it looked like it could slide in and out of the way. I made sure his arms and things could open up to reveal the hands, adding indents for the feet as well, and make sure those grey parts can slide around. I'm using parenting a lot of the time, so that way it follows the main object, but I can slide it around independently. The entire time, I'm trying my best to line it up as much as I can to the original car model, but in the end, I decided to settle for close enough. It's going to be where you swap it out anyway, so it doesn't need to be perfect. Now, while this 3D model doesn't need to adhere to the laws of physics, the closer we try to, the better it's going to look. So everything that moves needs to have a gap so that it can actually go there, like an action figure. This was recommended to me when I was trying to figure out why my Optimus Prime model looks so weird. I just didn't think about it, and parts were clipping into each other, phasing in and out of each other. Jazz here is probably still going to have some of that, but I've minimized it a lot. And after a day or so of tinkering away, we managed to get a model that was good for my needs. It looks just like the car, right? Good. That's what we want. It's the car, but with all the extra robot bits inside. So we've done that. Now what? Well, we need to make the props. You can see I planned this as far back as my 2D animatic. He's going to get out the boombox and start dancing away. And I thought as a fun little Easter egg, it could be based off of Blaster. He's another transformer, he turns into a boombox, that's kind of fun, right? So I imported an image of Blaster in his alt mode, pretty much face on, so that way I could just trace it. Most of the time, I'm just using default cubes or planes and just stretching and cutting them as needed, but for things like his circles, I just use a default circle. Also, remember to shade auto smooth. That means that all the edges are going to be super rounded and nice, but anything that's flat is going to stay flat. It's really useful. If you just shade smooth, it's going to make the entire thing look like it's wrapped in rubber, and it's not quite right. Now, if you're wondering how I got those circle holes, what I did is I made lots of little circles, and then actually did a Boolean cut. If you're wondering what a Boolean cut is, it's basically where you take an object and use it like a cookie cutter on another object. Now, I really want to have a little cassette tape inside it. So I imported it again, another image of a cassette face on, traced it over, and inset it inside Blaster. Now that I've made a cassette tape and I've inset it inside, I want to be able to see it through like glass, which is actually a lot easier than you might think. You literally just need to go into the shading tab, which gives you all the material nodes, and you just add a translucent BSDF. This already calculates most of this, believe it or not. A lot of people want to use glass in their animations, right? So it's an inbuilt preset made thing. It needs a little bit of tweaking here or there with a mix node and stuff like that, but it wasn't actually that tricky. So now we made Blaster, we need to make our set, right? We can't just have Jazz chilling out in the void of space like last week. Where's the floor? Where's the light? Ah. I really want this to be set inside of the Ark, and the Ark has Teletran 1 and all these other really cool sci-fi computer consoles. So let's start with that. Now, like with all G1 Transformers stuff, you can usually start with just a cube or a plane and add a mirror modifier and you're good to go. Found another picture that I really liked, started tracing it, found a couple from different perspectives and realized maybe I want it a bit more stretched widthways, but that's fine, we can tweak that. And slowly but surely, Teletran just came together. And it was so cool to see me make something that's ingrained in my brain. Teletran's been there from the beginning. One thing I really wanted is the screens to be kind of rounded, so I literally just got the square window hole or glass hole, whatever it is that I made, extruded it slightly, said shade smooth on that one specific plane, and the rubber effect worked really nicely here. And then I duplicated it, did some minor tweaking here or there so it didn't look the same, and I managed to make a whole array of different kinds of consoles. Reusing assets is the best way to get value out of your time. Now that we've done Teletran, we need to make the floor and walls, and I really wanted to have that sort of grid blocky look that the original G1 cartoon had. Since I'm using grease pencil, I can get those lines if I make them all as separate objects, right? It'll catch the edge of that object and it will make a line there. So I started with a cube. Then I would just extrude, do loop cuts, and try to keep everything at a 90-degree angle. I don't want anything diagonal as that doesn't match the reference material. Slowly but surely, I played the worst Jigsaw or Tetris game and eventually had a decent enough array that I could start copy pasting and turning it into the other side of the floor and the walls. It needs to be pretty big. Now, one thing you might notice is there's occasionally little gaps in between the cubes, so I made sure that there was a giant flat sheet plane underneath, just to make sure that there's color underneath if you can see through the gaps, which I tried my best to minimize. Oh yeah, by the way, I have over 200 cubes in this scene now because of this. But this is looking really cool, but we need to sort the colors. See, the Spider-Verse came out last week, right? And I kind of got a bit inspired to emulate some of the textures a bit more. So this is going to be using a mixture of textures and compositing. I know, I've never done compositing before. Compositing is that tab in Blender that's daunting, because no, I don't really know what it does, and apparently it does a lot to the scene, because it's the compositing, it's the connecting all the layers together that you've made, all the different passes and filters and effects. It's really useful, it's just really daunting. Right off the bat, where's my nodes? What? Why can't I see anything? Why isn't it like the shading tab? Where's my nodes? For some reason, by default, the nodes are turned off. Great start. Oh, these nodes aren't viewable in the viewport? But how do I see what they're doing then? How do I know I'm doing it right? Oh, we need a viewer node, and it's behind the other nodes. Okay, this is fine. Let's just keep going. Right, I want a noise node, because from my understanding, that'll add sort of a grainy noise texture to it, which means it doesn't look quite as clean and pristine, which, I mean, texture's always good. If you've seen my diorama builds and stuff, we want the texture. And in my particular case, it'll emulate the film grain that the original 80s cartoon had. Took me a while. I've got a janky setup, but I've got it working. Let's do some more texture-based stuff now. This is more in my wheelhouse of shading. Now, I'm really happy with my color ramp and cell shading effects there, but I want a little bit more. I want each color to have a unique sort of print on them. I'm going to use Blaster to test this out because he's got lots of wild different colors. Jazz is mostly black and white, Blaster's red, yellow, gray, black, so it's going to be more interesting on YouTube. Now, I primarily used Kevan Dram's tutorial to learn about more shading techniques, and in his video, he shows how to do a cool watercolor texture, which was kind of perfect. I did that to my grays and got this sort of splotchy, inky effect, and it was looking pretty cool. But I also want to add more textures. So I found out about texture nodes. These are inbuilt stuff in Blender, once again, like brick textures, grids, stuff like that. That once you connect and mix and do all that, you can then use texture coordinates and scaling, and basically I just broke the textures. I had no real clue of what I was doing outside of watching a couple tutorials, so I just kept throwing things at the wall and watching what sticked. I wanted each primary color to have a distinct texture. I don't mind if I reuse some of them, but I want the gray to be blotchy, and I want the red to have these grid lines. And maybe for the handle, we could do a checker pattern, or for the yellow, we could do streaks instead of round splops. Splops? Yeah, that's a word. And the best part is that I can just copy paste the cool textures I'm making and apply them to other things. I just need to swap the color ramp. So for my Ark, I used that watercolor effect and got some really cool results, but then it wasn't quite right. So I realized I could change it to be more like square watercolor blotches, which looked a lot better. Again, a unique texture instead of being round, it's square. I also made sure it was slightly metallic, and it started reflecting the light beautifully. I then applied these same textures to Jazz, adding the sort of streaks to his black. For colors like the white, I kept them as the standard cell shading, as that worked, but for things like his blue, they have little lines in them now. The glass is its own separate color, and the eyes I actually added a little glowing effect using the bloom like I did on his headlamps, so his visor glows now. Look at this render. Look at these renders. Tell me they don't look flipping amazing. Now that we've got the textures looking nice, I realized I could do some more stuff in the compositing. I could add a little blur effect, which should then make the edges sort of change the colors slightly, a bit like that prism blur I was doing last week in DaVinci. Look, you see what I mean? The colors, they turn yellow or green or whatever. It just adds that sort of Spider-Verse-y random colors effect. I tried to do some compositing stuff where if it was in the background, it would change to like blue and pink. I got it working for one render, and then it decided to break. I don't know why. Suddenly, it's all white. Why is all my renders white? Have I messed up my model? Have I broken this? Kinda. I broke the whole pink and blue edges thing, but the main thing I've done is, instead of having my mix node actually mixing, it was just giving out the output of the broken nodes, so all it was showing was white. The second I got rid of that and made the source go directly through the blur filter and straight to the output, it fixed it. Over an hour of troubleshooting, I might add. Okay. Now I want to do something else. I know, I'm doing a lot this week. I got so excited for this project. I want to add the stutter in Blender. Can I do the stop motion stutter? This means that if I can apply it to just the models, the camera can stay animated on once, and the camera won't stutter too. It's super easy. See, if you search stop motion effects instead of Spider-Verse effects on YouTube, you get a tutorial by Southern Shotty, where he basically makes lots of stop motion animation style stuff in Blender, right? And he wants that frame rate style. And he's kind of a bit smart and made an add-on that just does that. See, Blender does this thing called interpolation, right? I say I want the arm to be here on frame 1, and I want the arm to be here on frame 10. And Blender goes, okay, let's make these in between frames. What you can do manually is you can tweak that. You can say, okay, I only want you to animate some of these, yeah? But you have to do that manually, by hand, and it's tedious. Unless you use Southern Shotty's add-on. You install it, you then gain this little extra tab on the right-hand side. You get to choose the amount of steps you want, so the frame rate stutters, how many times does it repeat a frame. For most stuff, I just want to do 2, so it holds each frame for twice as long as it normally did, giving it a sort of bigger pause in between each. Select the model with the keyframes. I've got the one I did last week, let's just do it to that. Apply steps, bam, that stutter isn't lag or DaVinci or anything. That's it using the stop motion add-on. And you could even choose for it to ease in and out of the steps. You could just do that by choosing when the steps start and end is. It saves so much time. Thank you for making it free. I will put a link down the description because it's a really useful tool. Okay, so we've made the in-between model, we've made the props, we've made the diorama, we've made the textures, we've done the compositing, we've got a stop motion filter. We're basically ready to start animating next week. But I decided to do one more thing. See, I was showing off my blaster model, and I got a comment saying, aren't people gonna hope it transforms or expect it to transform? And I thought, yeah, I could probably do something like that. So, just like Jazz, I got my Boombox, split it up into individual components, and got to work, just sort of stretching and contorting it. The scaling wasn't quite right for the robot, so I decided to just tweak it and hope no one notices. The only problem Blaster has is that unlike Jazz, and this is a good thing in toys but a bad thing in modeling, is that he has no kibble. So it means that he's made out of his alt mode. He doesn't have these bits I can glue on like Jazz, which means that I can't just have a robot proportioned perfect arm inside. I need to make the vehicle mode be that robot proportions, so it's a little bit fiddly. But a benefit of doing Blaster 3rd is I have some assets to reuse, like the hands, once again. Never model hands more than once, if you can. And the head. The head? What do you mean? I've only made like Jazz and Optimus. Well, you see, I tried modeling Blaster's head from the ground up, and it looked like a weird jelly baby. I did not like it, because I used a subsurf mod on the face. It looked kind of rubbery and not right, and it didn't accept the line art very well. The line art does it on edges, and when you make something smooth, it only has edges on like the sides. So I copy-pasted Jazz's head and Frankensteined it into Blaster. To be honest, I didn't really use an awful lot of the original mesh, but I still think it's kind of funny that, you know, they share DNA. One thing I need to do is add that little round dome bit, which was literally just a UV sphere, which was stretched and pulled to match. It's a little bit tricky getting the edges to work, so I left the back kind of squared off, so that way it has a natural endpoint. I also parented that to the head because I don't really want to join the meshes, because then the shading starts fighting with each other and it's annoying. I could go back and manually tweak it, but I could just hit parent and move on in life. So we made Blaster. We need a rig. That's right, I'm doing a rig again. I'm doing so much this episode. For those that don't know, because they decided to watch part 3 before part 2, a rig is a skeleton. It's just these little bones that we can make, and we can just stretch it to match the proportions of the character, so of a Blaster. So in this case, we did is make sure that the bone head matches the top of his head, and while I probably could have copy-pasted Jazz's skeleton and tweaked it close enough, I decided to just make it from the ground up. It was a little easier to match the proportions instead of rescaling a pre-existing one. Most of the time, it was fine, except for doing the hands. The fingers each have 3 segments of their own, so that's a faff, and you also need to rename each bone. 1, because it makes life easier, and 2, because if you add a .L, you can select all of your armature, right-click, hit Symmetrize, and it will make a perfectly mirrored copy of the armature on the other side, making a .R. It also works the other way. So once I linked everything up, I decided to make a mid-transform model. And just like Jazz, this was where I took the Blaster model and broke his bones so that he mostly fit the Boombox shape. And then I'd also add some inserts and cuts and extra bits just to make it look like he can actually get into that shape. Doesn't need to be perfect. We're only going to see this model for maybe 3 seconds at most, realistically. So it just needs to be good enough. And once I was satisfied, I'm still not done. I need to add what I'm actually going to make Blaster do in my 2D animatic. So I went back into Flipper Clep and Doodle for an hour. I do not want to keep these sketches pristine and clean. It doesn't need to, just needs to get the vibe across, which is why he looks like a psychotic Pikachu. Now for my add a new scene, I want to have Talatran going on like, hey, there's a message. Then Blaster transforms. He's not just a prop anymore. He goes over to the monitor, activates it. Optimus Prime, who I already modeled a month ago, is all like, oi, mate, we need your help. And then Blaster and Jazz turn to each other, grin, and then run off screen. It's a simple but basic premise, right? So now, finally, after all of that, we are done with this week's update. I've done basically everything except 3D animation, which was on purpose because now I get to spend a week animating just the transformation of the car and just the transformation of the Blaster. I might do some extra stuff if I've got a good stride, but the point is that I get to spend as much time as I want polishing the animation so that it looks as fluid and lovely as I can. My Optimus Prime, I spent a couple days on. I want to spend 7 just on Jazz and Blaster. And once that updates up with animating of the transformations, we're on to our final part, which is animating the rest of the scene, right? The dancing and the message and stuff like that. And I think it's gonna look really lovely. So please, make sure you subscribe so that you see the rest of this, because I don't know if you can tell, I'm excited. And when I'm excited about a project, that means it's gonna turn out really well. If you have any tips, tricks, tutorials you want to recommend, please flick them my way in the comment section. I'm always willing to learn more so that I can make this better. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to see you next week. If you like Transformers-related content, check out my Cybertronian Saturdays. That's where I take one of these figures off my shelves and do a review on them. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this update, and I'll catch you next week for some animation. Farewell!